Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Yai lai 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 lai. Shalom, shalom b'roma, v'ya'aseh shalom aleinu.
Our morning service, and our Haftorah, our prophetic reading for this Yom Kippur morning, is from the book of Isaiah. And I always find it quite brilliant, as I mentioned earlier, that the ancient rabbis chose this particular section of the book of Isaiah for Yom Kippur because on the most important fast day of the Jewish year, the Haftorah carries the message that God does not actually desire our fasting. We are not meant to enter Yom Kippur under the assumption that fasting and prayer alone can bring about atonement for our sins, so Isaiah contends. If we spend the day fervently engaged in ritual activities and then return to our lives as if nothing has changed, as if spiritual self-reflection has nothing to do with how we conduct ourselves in the world, then we've missed the point entirely. Going through the motions of Yom Kippur with a sense of complacency about the problems of the world and the city around us, according to Isaiah, is a fundamentally un-Jewish way of relating to God. Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote, "The worth of worship, far from being absolute, is contingent upon moral living, and that when immorality prevails, worship is detestable. Men may not drown the cries of the oppressed with the noise of hymns, nor buy off the Lord with increased offerings." In other words, we cannot honestly define Yom Kippur as relating purely to our personal spiritual development. God demands more of us. To avoid reflecting on our actions in the realms of social action and social justice on Yom Kippur would be to fly in the face of what our prophets and the rabbis who highlighted their texts are trying to teach us. While we may prefer to engage with the liturgy or biblical readings or even sermons that speak only in terms of our own lives, it behooves us on this most sacred day of the Jewish year to resist that very self-centered temptation and to be reminded of our broader obligations to others who are in need. It's why it felt so fitting to invite Nashville's Mayor Freddie O'Connell here with us today, and I just want to thank Mayor O'Connell has 2 young kids, and it is their fall break, so thank you for being with us on this day. It was, I know, a sacrifice, and we're really grateful. And we invited him here today to talk about his spiritual and religious background and how it transforms, or I should say informs, his imperative to bring our city together and move it forward, we hope, in strength, health, and prosperity for all. So I'm going to, in just a moment, invite our past president and chair of our social action group, Lyn Hy, to come forward and to introduce the mayor. But first, I'd like to invite Ken Last to please come forward, and Rick Stein and Steve Abelman, as we share this brief but yet important reading for the day from the prophet Isaiah.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam tzur kol ha'olamim tzadik v'kol hadarot ha'el ha'ne'eman ha'omer v'otzeh ha'medaber mekayem shechol devarav v'emet b'tzedek al ha'torah v'al ha'avodah v'al ha'avim v'al yom ha'shabbat hazeh v'al yom ha'kippurim hazeh shenatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu לקדושה ולמנוחה, למחילה ולסליחה ולכפרה, לכבוד ולתפארת, על הכל אדוני אלוהינו, אנחנו מודים לך, זימחקים אותך, יתברך שמך בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם ועד, וברכה אמת וקיים לעד, ברוך אתה אדוני, מלך מוחל וסולח לאבותינו ולאבות עמו בית ישראל, ומעביר אמונתנו בכל שנה ושנה, מלך על כל הארץ, מקדש השבת וישראל ויום הכיפורים.
Cry with full throat without restraint. Raise your voice like a ram's horn. Declare to my people their transgression, to the house of Jacob their sin. To be sure they seek me daily, eager to learn my ways, like a nation that does what is right, that has not abandoned the laws of its God. They ask me for the right way. They are eager for the nearness of God. Why then when we fasted, did you not see? When we starved our bodies, did you pay no heed? Because on your fast day you see to your business and oppress all your laborers. Because you fast in strife and contention, and you strike with a wicked fist. Your fasting today is not such as to make your voice heard on high. Is such the fast I desire? A day for humans to starve their bodies? Is it bowing the head like a bulrush and lying in sackcloth and ashes? Do you call that a fast, a day when the eternal is favorable?
No, this is the fast I desire, to unlock the fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. It is to share your bread with the hungry and to take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, to clothe him and not to ignore your own kin. Then shall your light burst through like dawn and your healing spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall march before you. The presence of the Eternal shall be your rear guard. Then when you call, the Eternal will answer. When you cry, God will say, Here I am, Hineni. If you banish the yoke from your midst, the menacing hand and the evil speech, and you offer your compassion to the hungry and satisfy the famished creature, then shall your light shine in darkness, and your gloom shall be like noonday. The Eternal will guide you always. God will slake your thirst in parched places and give strength to your bones. You shall be like a watered garden, like a spring whose waters do not fall.
Thank you, Steve, Rick, and Ken, and I'd like to welcome Lyn Hy.
Thank you, Rabbi. As chair of the Social Action Justice Committee, and on behalf of all of our members, I'm happy to welcome you to this very important forum. It really fits so well into our charge, not only as a committee, but as a Reformed Jewish community where we believe in tikkun olam, we believe in repairing the world. And at this point in time, we're thinking about our future in the upcoming year, 5785, and how we contribute not only to Micah, but to our community. When Nashville was electing a mayor in 2023, I went to many forums and spoke with a lot of people about all of the candidates. One thing came up consistently about Freddie O'Connell. In fact, my friends and fellow committee members, Betty and Kenny Lickstein, related how wonderful a councilman he was in their Germantown community and how he followed through on all the requests and all of the asks from his constituents, even when he couldn't fulfill them. They felt heard and they felt valued, and that's really what it's all about. If that weren't enough, at every forum, he stood out for his breadth of knowledge, the knowledge needed to run a growing city. I could list all of his experiences, from councilperson to sitting on various citywide boards to his work history, but suffice to say, he's proven that he has both the knowledge and the people skills to see problems and issues from many points of view. And from this wealth of possible strategies that he pulls from and the areas that he impacts, he always has in mind all Nashvillians, not just ones who live in certain areas. And that is the work of our committee, is to address all of Nashville. So I am very proud as a Nashvillian since 2020 to introduce you to our mayor, Freddie O'Connell, and to this other person that I have some knowledge of, Lyn Hy, our incoming president, who also happens to be my husband, to come up here and to lead this discussion. Thank you very much. Good Shabbos.
So,
Mine's pretty
welcome.
on.
Welcome, Mayor O'Connell. We're so happy to have you here today. Thank you again for making the time to join with us. And I just want to say to everybody, we're here sort of off kilter, so if you want to see what's happening, you can quickly move over to this side, but stay back because the sun will get you in the front row. So, we'll start off with a question that is related to our community. We understand that part of your heritage is Jewish. Could you please tell us about that, as well as share a more personal, vulnerable story of repentance and or forgiveness? Just something light and just...
It's not like it's a high holy day or anything.
Right.
Well, first of all, Gomar Tov. This is why this is a special honor. So first of all, let me say thank you to the Rabbis Rice and to Congregation Micah. Just over a year ago when we were first getting started, Congregation Micah hosted an interfaith prayer breakfast before the inauguration, and it's great to be back reflecting on the work and some of the questions. So yes, I can start a generation back and sideways and go back to ancestors, but earlier this year I got to go to Temple Bethel in Providence, Rhode Island for my nephew's bar mitzvah. My brother Sam and his wife Rachel are there with her parents, and the reason that I think I was there for a bar mitzvah has as much to do with my mom and her sister arriving in Dixon, Tennessee in their childhood, children of Ernest Siegel. So my mom and her sister's maiden name is Siegel. It was originally Ziegelman, and we were just up in Ellis Island earlier this year, and unfortunately the search capabilities were offline, but Ernest's father was an Orthodox rabbi in Poland, and he was not willing to leave Europe, but 3 sons and a sister were, and so two brothers started a family business in New York. Ernest stubbornly did not also want to leave Europe. He wanted to play professional soccer in the early mid-20th century, and was finally persuaded by his brothers to come, but for reasons I'm not clear on, did not want to go to New York. He said, I'll come manage a factory in Dixon, Tennessee, where he met my grandmother. And so I grew up understanding some of Judaism's traditions. For whatever reason, I think being the eldest son, just like how I learned to drive a manual transmission car and my brother still can't, I would always say the Hanukkah blessing and light the lead candle for Hanukkah. My mom would come to our classrooms when we were growing up and generally share the story of Judah Maccabee, and so it was really interesting because my dad was from an Irish Catholic family, and so we had parts of both traditions under one roof, but we would, my mom fundamentally grew up in the Jewish community of Nashville, and so we had a lot of exposure to that, and it's been very interesting to see my brother dive deeper and following in very similar footsteps. My parents met at WashU in St. Louis, told us how much they didn't like it, left before they graduated, were planning to hitchhike as far west as they could, didn't leave the state of Missouri, wound up at College of the Ozarks where they completed their degrees, and then spent our entire childhood telling us stories about how much they disliked St. Louis and WashU. And then, of course, my brother goes to WashU, just like my dad, marries a nice little Jewish girl, as his grandmother put, or as our grandmother put it, and they now are up in Rhode Island, and we'd love to see them when we can. So some of the heritage there, from a forgiveness and atonement standpoint, there are so many different stories, and I think I could talk about my, if you wanted to think about it from a family standpoint, I would say, it's been very interesting to reflect on the stories that my mom tells of the 1950s in Dixon, Tennessee. One, even though her father did not have, he had a Polish accent she was unaware of. Sometimes later in life people would mention it to her and she didn't know. And she herself does not really have a Southern accent. She went on to become a career foreign language teacher. And she doesn't tell stories of either anti-Semitism in the South or even really racism in the South, even though, she grew up in a period of segregation. And so it has been an interesting journey from the stories that she has at least been willing to tell, or how stories may have shaped her experience, to now when I feel like we are in a new era grappling with challenges of very vocal and sometimes what seems like rampant anti-Semitism. And so thinking about that generational change, that generational perspective, trying to make sure that now my daughters and my brother's kids think through this stuff across generations together, so we make sure that we're taking care of one another as a family and in a community, and making sure we look after one another so that none of this stuff becomes, there's still, I think, for all of us, enough of that connection of shared heritage that there are, I don't think you ever stray too far from the never again philosophy, and yet how to balance that in a community where we started this whole journey of being mayor with many faiths under one roof, when we see those relationships strained is still a daily challenge.
Thank you. If you had been here earlier, you would have heard more words about working together, taking care of one another, and so we're happy to hear those words coming from you too. But let's switch to something a little less personal, more of what you deal with on a day-to-day basis. There's so many issues facing our city. Could you share two that are important to you and discuss with us how you and your administration are addressing them?
Sure. So I think a lot can be discovered from, we actually started the administration on day one launching 3 transition committees, and they were How Nashville Moves, How Nashville Works, and How Nashville Grows. But fundamentally, those 3 committees are trying to tackle 2 key things that I think everyone on our team understands are really the priorities for ensuring that this remains a great place to live for as many Nashvillians as possible for a very long time, and those are cost of living and quality of life. And we knew, and I knew even in representing District 19 for the past 8 years, that we were starting to see increases specifically in housing costs, but also in transportation costs. And so we have spent a lot of this year focused on not just creating programs or enhancing programs, but also elevating programs, because we have so many different pathways into support, not all of which have the awareness, and I'll talk about those in a second, but we also want quality of life, because as a father of two increasingly less young daughters, I have a teenager now myself, so that's a whole series of daily challenges on its own. I feel like what we have been able to offer them frequently, just by way of what is available in the city, parks and libraries and public education, is actually better than what my brother and I were even able to experience when we were growing up. The Nashville of our youth did not have a zoo, did not have an art museum, did not have an amazing Country Music Hall of Fame and museum, did not have an amazing array of some of the parks and an upgraded downtown library and multiple renovated or brand new libraries around the city. There are so many things that we have been able to take our daughters to that are frankly just better childhood experiences than some of what my brother and I had. But I also hear frequently people lamenting that there aren't enough things for kids and families to do, and we know from community needs evaluation a couple of years ago from Metro Social Services that aging Nashvillians are feeling this same pressure, that there are concerns about places to gather. COVID was a huge blow to the idea of just overall successful social interactions, and so to hang together as a city, as a community at all remains one of our challenges. So we've spent some energy in just making sure also that people know the things that are happening in the city, that we are a participant in making sure that Metro does a better job of communicating the amazing programs for teens or for seniors at our parks and community centers, at our libraries, where partners are elevating those things too, because we have such a rich network of partners. So those are really the two things, and under cost of living in particular, we've been trying to continue to build out an affordable housing toolkit. We have something that I hope everyone in here knows about happening in just 24 days, which is the November 5th election, where if you stick around to the very end of your ballot, you will see a referendum for a transportation improvement program that will be one of our most important affordability tools that we will be offering. And then we have some amazing programs. We're able to expand a maternal and infant health program countywide as a result of federal dollars. We just created a new program called Reset with partners like AgeWell Tennessee that is designed to try to help aging Nashvillians have awareness about financial assistance opportunities that they may not have been aware of, and it's a companion to our existing Financial Empowerment Center, which is completely free financial counseling for anyone regardless of income. So cost of living, quality of life are the top two, and then under each of those we have a variety of things our incredible team has been working on.
Thank you. Two issues that we're particularly concerned about here. One of them you've already sort of addressed, but if you could tell us a little bit more about what you and your administration are doing for affordable housing.
Sure. Housing is complicated, and that's why I think it takes a long time. It's also expensive to construct, and if you think about the stack of what goes into it, there's land, there's materials, there's labor, and there's also what you can do on land, and all of those things contribute to the expense of housing construction. If you look at it right now, it takes, if you're thinking about even just a relatively simple studio apartment, the raw cost of delivering that is generally going to be about $150,000 at a minimum, right? So if you said that we need 50,000 homes that are more affordable for Nashvillians today, one, you couldn't create those tomorrow. It would take the cost of construction, the timeline tends to be 18 months if you're sprinting the entire time, and then it becomes a math problem. And that's before you get to the community conversation about where we're going to build those 50,000 homes, et cetera. But we know that we do need those 50,000 homes, and so we're looking at every opportunity. I will say first and foremost, transportation is affordable housing. Right now, today, according to the Economic Policy Institute data, which I've tracked for a couple years, for most Nashville households, the cost of transportation has actually marginally exceeded the cost of housing. And that is because the cost to own, maintain, fuel, insure, and increasingly park a car is more than $1,000 a month for most households. So it is quite expensive to just find reliable access to a car and housing that is not taking up 30% or more of your take-home income. And so we have to address that. So we think that making access to a system that lets people become more invested in their professional opportunities and a pathway to home ownership. Being car-free for 3.5 years was my pathway to home ownership, and it was possible because I could be a bike commuter and use our limited transit system. Right now today, if you are within a quarter mile of our limited transit system, you save $200 a year more than your neighbors who are farther away simply because you have the option. And that's $200 a year that you are then able to offset your cost of living in the city and either invest in ongoing opportunities, childcare, whatever. We want that to be available to tens of thousands more Nashvillians. That's why passage of the Transportation Improvement Program is so important on November 5th. It's among the many reasons. But it is part of our affordable housing policy. This year, too, we joined the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee, anchor partners like Vanderbilt University and First Horizon Bank to launch a new Catalyst Fund. This is basically a fund that will help us preserve multifamily communities that already have people living there, already have stable rent, but the owner of the property is looking to put it on the market in an environment where you would see very likely a new landlord raise rents. And so mission-driven developers can access funds from this new Catalyst Fund. We are expecting the first project to possibly be approved later this month. And this will allow rents to be stabilized, not by policy, but by people whose mission is to offer long-term affordable housing. When we developed the East Bank, we created a master developer agreement with the Fallon Company out of Boston on 100 acres of public land. And this was remarkable. Bob Mendez, our Chief Development Officer, and Councilmember Coupin, who is here, was very involved in this process too. We secured a century's worth of deeply affordable housing in a mixed income community in new neighborhoods that we hope ends an era of concentrated poverty, but also ensures that people who may be working in the footprint of the Titans Stadium, which is under construction, also have the opportunity to live there regardless of what their wages are. So we wanted to have a community that could support all different kinds of neighbors and that we knew there would be long-term affordable housing, and this is unprecedented in anything we've done. We continue to make large investments in our other most significant existing affordable housing tool, the Barnes Housing Trust Fund, named for the Reverend Bill Barnes, who was one of my mentors when I served on the Nashville MTA Board of Directors, again, right there at the intersection of transportation and housing. He was resolute that we work to end poverty, but specifically deconcentrate it, that we shouldn't have areas that we say this is where we expect all of the low-income residents of Nashville to live. And so that trust fund has built some permanent supportive housing for people that have a very hard time living traditionally. Park Center has opened some of those. It has created other long-term affordable housing scenarios. We just, with the council's help, got another round of grants out in multiple different parts of the city. We just found out that MDHA, using a mixed income payment in lieu of taxes model, has just created their 10,000th affordable home. So we are still partnering with our local development and housing authority. So some of this is investment, some of this is policy, some of this is partnership. And a lot of it is community conversation because we still have, you can talk to Councilmember Coupin about this, there are council members who have said out loud on the record, there will be absolutely no affordable housing created in their district on their watch. That's a challenge.
I think I might live there. So thank you for that. We expected that we would hear some very specific and concrete detail, and thank you for sharing that with us.
I'll say there's an affordable housing dashboard that the Housing Division at Metro Planning under the leadership of Angie Hubbard is working to create, so everyone can see the progress we're making, the effect of the tools, and we are expecting them to deliver us a unified housing strategy before the end of the year that I expect we will then immediately get to work on.
Great, thank you. Another concern of ours particularly is how is your administration going to address the rising anti-Semitism that we've seen here in Nashville, especially last summer with the appearance of some unfriendly protesters?
Yeah, and I would go further than calling them unfriendly. What I said to multiple people was that I thought we defeated the Nazis in World War II, but we clearly have not. I'll say a few things. I hope this congregation understands the wonderful and long-term and strong relationship our Metro Nashville Police Department has with our Jewish community in Nashville. That will continue. It has been one of the most important relationships we've had well before I took office, so I can't take credit, but I know that under Chief Drake's leadership, it is something he is 100% committed to. It is something I am 100% committed to. We have shared intelligence. That intelligence spans multiple different organizations within Nashville, including what is shared from congregations and leadership. We've worked also with the Nashville Jewish Federation. It is shared with state and federal authorities who also share with us scenarios. We have been able to prepare in advance for some of the worst of this, and then we also wanted to respond to what we saw. We had some challenges with enforceability of some of the things that were on the books. We have already worked with Councilmember Coupin and other leaders on the Metro Council to pass 4 safety bills recently that we think are going to offer us durable protection both for this November's election, but also any time people come to the Metro Council or to the Metro Planning Commission or to the Metro Historical Zoning Commission or anywhere you might see a public hearing. We think it will protect our Metro employee workforce more effectively as they enter public buildings where there are clear pathways for public participation in scenarios. We heard a lot of concerns from people seeking to participate in public hearing, Metro Council members and the Vice Mayor who were there presiding, and our Metro workforce. And so we wanted to make sure that we were keeping public spaces safe and also faith communities and places where people gather safe. And so we think this collection of 4 bills will be an important toolkit in that overall process. But of course, some of this is just making plain, and we work with our private sector friends, our faith community friends, and sometimes I think it is possible to demonstrate that we stand together as a community. We've tried to do that several times. I've tried to do that several times, and we'll continue to demonstrate that this is a city that does not tolerate hate actors, hate speech to the point that we can legally, and I expect to be constantly present, showing the partnership that we have with our amazing faith leaders and specifically our Jewish community. And again, I had I could see all of this coming together recently, actually over at West End, where another friend just invited me to a bar mitzvah, and so this has been a year of a few different bar mitzvahs for me. And it's great to know as I arrive that not only is the community looking out for one another, that the practices that they've got on the ground to keep one another safe are effective, but also, again, that our Metro Nashville Police Department is there, and that all of us should feel safe coming into spaces like this.
I would just verify that our own security committee here at Congregation Micah has informed us of the excellent rapport that we've established with our West Precinct captain, and the especially in concern with our Children's Academy, that very much appreciate that kind of cooperation.
And I'm glad you mentioned the last part too. We have also worked with Metro Schools, because we also want to make sure that young people in the city, again, especially and importantly in public spaces, enjoy those same protections and don't feel like they're going to have their process of learning interrupted by anti-Semitism.
Thank you. Let's switch it a little bit. Last year at High Holidays, Rabbi Laurie introduced us to Glimmers, small everyday moments that can make you feel calm and safe and connected. The opposite of those triggers that make your blood pressure go up and make you bite your lip and maybe your tongue. So this year she asked congregants to share any of their own glimmers from the past year, and many did. But do you have a glimmer from your past year that you could share with us, an unexpected, unlooked for moment of joy or peace?
You know, I am very fortunate. I was just talking actually with a group of other mayors who have been kind of participating in a leadership process. I'm very lucky because in growing up here in what is routinely recognized as one of the friendliest cities, it's rare that I experience a day that does not have glimmers in it. And that's wonderful. I mean, I've had people ask me before why it seems like I'm able to stay so calm, as you know, they say this must be a stressful job. You know, why don't you ever seem stressed out? And I think some of it has to do with the fact that I'm also careful to be able to observe those glimmers. It is, I will say, I have observed that there are people in the city that seem to wear sunglasses that prevent visibility of glimmers. I don't recommend that. It's not a healthy way of life. Trust me when I say that I see all of the things that need attention, need fixing, need resolution, need improvement. But knowing that, and knowing even the urgency of that, and the urgency of poverty and homelessness and crime and hate, none of that should prevent joy. And so I feel like I'm you know, one of the greatest blessings that I have in my life is that those glimmers are a daily feature for me. And so just for today, it was beautiful weather for the TSU homecoming parade, where spirits were high and happy, and then I got to go home and enjoy a little bit of time on the front porch in the fresh air, and then have lunch with the girls while we waited for Whitney to get home from the hospital, where she is on call this weekend. But watching the two of them be sisters as they've been on fall break has been a week full of glimmers.
Well, you kind of stole my thunder, because the second part of Rabbi Laurie's presentation last year was encouraging us to make it a habit to look for those, and here you've already made that part of your daily routine. One last question from me. Your agenda seems very much in line with the findings of the Imagine Nashville survey. But were there details in that report that caused you to revise or refine any of your plans for the future of the city?
Well, so I think the good news was, as we started our transition committee process last year, we came into it with Imagine Nashville not being a complete surprise to us. Alex Jehanger chaired one of our transition committees. He was also one of the co-chairs of the Imagine Nashville process. It was actually really lovely to have our transition process playing out as they were surveying and looking at findings. Now, what was remarkable was they had briefed all of the mayoral candidates about what they were intending to do. They were pre-survey at that point, but they said, here's the focus. We're going to do a values-based survey. They actually intended for it to be, you know, contain possible platform elements for any future mayor, to allow someone to drive an agenda around some of the principles that came out of that survey. But when we sat down at the Community Foundation for the first kind of, I guess, just findings of the data before it was compiled into a report with recommendations, it was like, oh, you guys just did a deep dive on data that was almost exactly like what we were talking about in our campaign, that belonging matters, that there are pressures of growth, that a public investment strategy really ought to put our residents first and foremost. And so it has not taken a lot of adaptation to find alignment there. I mean, and that was, you know, there's probably some serendipity to that, but I think also it was a motivating factor for me in running for mayor in the first place, because these were things that I sensed, and now we have the data that demonstrate why I sensed that, why I think a lot of Nashvillians were sensing that too at the same time. And so they came up with sort of 4 principal recommendations for action areas, and what we have agreed to do that I would say is probably the biggest adaptation is we are going to have one of the senior leaders on our team now pair with a senior leader from the Community Foundation to kind of create 4 working groups that address those 4 priorities. And so there will be probably a multi-year process whereby we have a public and private joint effort with the mayor's office and the Community Foundation to make intentional progress, where we think these kind of action teams will probably also be a mix of public sector and private sector people looking to get this stuff done. But I think the commitment that Hal Cato, as CEO of the Community Foundation, and I have made to one another is we don't want this to be, you know, hey, great, this is a report that now goes on to another dusty bookshelf. And this is also one of the motivating principles of our administration, is that as we went through the transition process, as we developed our transportation improvement program, we were taking out old reports and saying, what are the best ideas here that we can go forward and implement as quickly as possible? And that's really been the story of this first year.
That was one of the frequent comments during the entire electoral process, was how many studies had actually been completed in Nashville and then put aside for another study. So to hear that there's this effort to bring it all together is very encouraging. I just want to ask, these high holidays are a period of reflection and introspection. And as you review your first year in office, what stands out for you as your greatest challenges, surprises, accomplishments, or disappointments?
Yeah. So if you want to see the way we've tried to transition planning fatigue to doing fatigue, go check out our year of progress at nashville.gov/progress. I will say, while I was still on the Metro Council and participated in a budget process that actually increased public funding for the arts, one of the more surprising things that happened last summer before I took office was something that was a tipping point for a nearly total meltdown of our public arts funding process, that we then added an additional $3 million to resolve this with some promises that were made in a couple different scenarios that would have been difficult to maintain. And I would say the future, I am more optimistic about it right now than I was a year ago at this time, but there are some unresolved issues there. And it involves some equity issues, it involves larger long-term arts organizations, smaller upstart artists and arts organizations, and how we fund them. And it revealed some other challenges, including that one of our smaller arts funding streams we had been implementing unlawfully for quite some time. And so you have to respond to those things, and sometimes the bureaucratic institutions responsible for responding to those things are not exactly like the Metro Council, where you have a public hearing and you get immediate response to it. There are some things, unfortunately, that do require accounting principles or following the law, and it is hard to explain when something is a required policy that is unpopular and takes time to get to a place where it may better respond to public interest, but that was a surprise and an ongoing challenge. I think because there has been adjacency to the Covenant school shooting, we've had some bizarre things where, unfortunately, a couple of now former police officers were involved in unauthorized release of information, some of them which should not have been released legally, which caused a lot of pain for the victims of the Covenant school shooting and the families at that school. That some of that is still unfolding and may wind up having legal consequences. But nearby to that, there was a kind of a set of allegations that came out that contained information that was challenging both to the community oversight process, but also to some elements of departmental leadership, and it really caused a renewed sense of frustration about the idea of the fact that the community should be involved in some way in oversight of the police department. But we are, I hope, just a couple weeks out from a final memorandum of understanding between our existing civilian review board and the Metro Nashville Police Department. And my hope there too is that while it has required some patience and endurance from participants, that we should be reaching a more tolerable equilibrium on that front as well. I think one of the most pleasant surprises, though, and I know how much COVID contributed to this, but I also think, again, the spirit of our campaign, what Imagine Nashville was discovering, we were just so excited this year that when the Vanderbilt University poll comes out, which they do every year, that's kind of a landscape survey of the perspective of Nashvillians and a variety of things. Every year for decades it has tracked whether we as a city think we're on the right track or the wrong track. And this year, for the first time in years, a majority of Nashvillians agreed that we were back on the right track. And my hope is that the work we do and have done all this year and come into next year will reinforce that.
I think Rabbi Lur has some questions. My last one is it cool being mayor?
At the same time, it is both one of the world's best and most interesting jobs and also one of the most challenging.
That's fair.
Spoken like a diplomat. Rabbi Lori.
I might say the same about being a rabbi, so fair.
I can only imagine.
Yeah. So there's a few questions from around the room, Mayor, if I may. The first is, how much does the East Bank project affect yours or your office's daily work? Is that a distraction? Is it, how are you all engaged with that?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. So we took office knowing that the mayor's office and Metro Council last term agreed to construct a new Titan Stadium, and thereby we would take possession of 100+ acres of public land, and that it realistically should be redeveloped. And so that means everything from new parks and green space, lots of new infrastructure. There will be significant roadway redesign. This is the footprint around the existing Titan Stadium, including the existing Titan Stadium, which will be demolished in 2027 when the Titans start playing in their new stadium. And so we knew this would have to be a top priority for the administration, is why we created a position that I don't think has really existed in Nashville previously, and that is a Chief Development Officer, and that is the role that Bob Mendez is playing for us. Chris Koster recently joined his team to support that, because it turns out it's not just the East Bank. It is sites like the Global Mall. It is sites like 88 Hermitage, which we bought a few years ago. It is sites like an old school on Brick Church Pike, a library in Bellevue, the Naval Building in Shelby Park. Frankly, if you look at all of the public land or scenarios like at Foster Avenue, where you may have local and state land with some private land, there is $1 billion worth of land in this city that we in some way will be involved in redeveloping, especially if you take into account what the Housing Division has surveyed in terms of our existing inventory of public land and academic, faith, and healthcare land that coupled with it, that we may be able to put into play for the purposes of affordable housing. So I would say it is a focus, but because it is our approach to developing it is fundamentally in line with our 3 transition committees, and I think the values that were expressed in Imagine Nashville, I would not call it a distraction. It does take a lot of time and energy, and I know Bob and his team, there is still an East Bank team that spans the Metro Planning Department, Nashville Department of Transportation, Metro Parks, all 3 principally involved, as well as Metro Water as a major infrastructure player. That team has been working all year. We got some great bipartisan legislation at the state level that was supported by the Metro Council to allow us to create an East Bank Development Authority. So again, it will have something akin to when we've done multiple public entertainment facilities. It's why we have a sports authority. When we built the convention center, it's why we created a convention center authority. It's something that will be durable, that looks out across the decades of redevelopment that we expect to happen on the East Bank, especially if you consider that Oracle will be developing River North, and it sounds like there will be an auction taking place for the recycling facility on the south side. So there will be a lot of development activity there, and it will not all get completed within 3 years.
Okay, great. We're not going to get to all the questions we have. So you have said, you know, our community really thinks this last year of before October 7th and after October 7th. And you've often said that your job is not to necessarily solve global politics, but to focus on building a stronger, better, more hospitable Nashville. And yet, as you mentioned already here in the sanctuary, that there are multiple faith groups and multiple demographics that live within the city and pull on you for validation and support. How have you felt successful in navigating that, and how have you felt as though you perhaps have fallen short, if at all?
I think I think it's actually turned out to be helpful in the fact that it does not create a more incendiary environment to not talk about my outlook on politics in the Middle East, because that is not what my job is. I think it is much more important to recognize that people here in Nashville are experiencing real pain. And so, for instance, I met an Israeli woman some weeks after October 7th who now lived in Nashville, and going back to Glimmers, she confessed that she had not experienced joy since October 7th. That's a hard moment, but then when I participated in the Millions of Conversations event that Summer Ali led in Hillsborough Village also several months ago, I met a young Palestinian woman who had lost many members of her family in the months after October 7th, and she is also experiencing pain. And I think one of the things that is really important about all of this is the way that local residents are feeling pain, and how can we make sure that together as community there is some ability to stand together in shared spaces. I think one of the more challenging parts of this has been, as we have seen things continue not to de-escalate but to escalate, I'm still hearing more than a year later that it is too soon to gather in the way that we did before October 7th. So I'm very, very aware of that sensation of the world before October 7th and the world after October 7th, and nothing about it has fundamentally gotten easier, even just in Nashville.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, now I'm going to move away from that difficult topic. When you mentioned the Vanderbilt poll, I thought for sure you were going to talk about taking it down Broadway and into the Cumberland River, but that's not what you said. So, although that was very exciting.
I did get asked at the TSU parade today if they could just take the polls from the stadium and throw them in the river if Eddie George and the team win today.
It's a thing now. So, okay, we're a big sales tax state. That's, one of our signatures, and that is going to increase. And not everybody is thrilled about that, and especially because, that scenario leverages all people, right? I mean, it's not just an increase on sales tax for those in a certain income bracket. It's for everybody. So how do you address that, or how are you addressing that?
Well, if anybody here at Congregation Micah goes just a few blocks south, you will be paying sales tax of 9.75%. If you go into Nashville and turn east down I-40 and go out and shop at Providence and Mount Juliet, you'll be paying 9.75% on their sales tax. And I guess I would ask it this way. Raise your hand if you know the sales tax you paid on the last item you purchased. How much sales tax did you pay and what did you buy? No, I mean, what dollar amount sales tax did you pay on the last item you purchased? Yeah. A few years ago, when we created the bipartisan legislation called the IMPROVE Act that lets local jurisdictions across Tennessee create dedicated sources of revenue, they allowed local jurisdictions to access 6 possible forms of revenue they could dedicate. And what that means is it's immune to the year-over-year budget cycle. It means that if we were talking about a corridor like Franklin Pike, if we were talking about a corridor like Hillsborough Pike, Nolensville, Murfreesboro, where we were trying to make it safer from end to end, we wouldn't get 2 years deep and then, oh gosh, you know what, need a new fire station this year, we can't complete this project. We've been leaving billions of dollars on the table for the past several years, and what this sales tax surcharge does is bring us exactly into alignment with every other county around Davidson, except for Sumner, where Hendersonville just also increased their sales tax marginally. When you spend $50 at Target or Kroger, you will put a quarter in the jar to pay for this program, and most of the time when you are buying something like a tube of toothpaste, it may be literally less than a few pennies in terms of what you pay. Meanwhile, you're expanding to tens of thousands of Nashvillians that same opportunity to save $200 a year or more. The number of stories I've heard just this year as people have started to gain access to transit or had infrastructure develop safely in their neighborhood where they now have a sidewalk where they didn't before and they're cutting car trips, it's a huge, huge saving. So I understand the concern about sales tax, but ultimately it is right in line with what Middle Tennessee is already doing. It brings us back $1 billion that we will otherwise not have access to. And I am perfectly content as a lifelong Nashvillian to pay a half penny on every dollar on every purchase I make so that I can repatriate $1 billion and stop building better transit in Austin and Charlotte and Denver and Indianapolis and Cleveland and start building it here.
So there were a number of questions about transit, and is it fair to say that on the ballot, the motion at the end of the ballot is really going to be necessary in order to effectualize many of the goals that your office would like to see implemented with transit? Because some of the questions were, how come some of the things that you came into office saying you wanted to see happen haven't happened yet? How come we haven't timed the stoplights? Which that would be great if we could do that, please. But how come WeGo is not offering more services? So, I mean, there's a number of questions around transit. So if you could just kind of give us a summary.
Yeah, the summary to all of those is one of the things I talked about explicitly for more than a year was that it's very, very difficult to do all these things. I mean, that's... If you enjoy the status quo, you should vote no in November. If you know that we can do better, you should vote yes. Mm-hmm. I know that we can do better. And it is expensive, and it requires planning, and it requires access to state and federal resources. Sometimes we are literally ineligible for right now to get this transformative stuff done in a coordinated way. So we did spend a year. We had Michael Briggs as a director of transportation planning join us. We asked WeGo and NDOT and planning to align a lot of their work and schedule it in such a way that it was compatible with the IMPROVE Act so that we could build dedicated funding to support it. But in the meantime, We have put more Vision Zero funding on the table than ever before in the history of the city, as we have lost too many of our own residents just trying to cross the street. It is starting to have an effect. We have continued to aggressively build sidewalks. The very first signals are underway. We just opened on October 1st a traffic management center. The hard part is it connects to just a handful of smart signals right now. Mm-hmm. It takes this kind of investment to transform 2/3 of the signalized intersections in Nashville, and I want those green lights as badly as anybody, but I also want the transit options, because I will be glad to get out of your way while you decide to be traffic if I can allow myself not to be. Exactly. We've made tremendous progress, but we, in a tight budget year where we were focused on making sure Metro employees didn't get hit hardest by inflation, while we were covering $70 million worth of investments in one-time federal funding that continued after COVID for Metro schools, which is showing national attention-grabbing performance improvements. We thought that was a priority, and the hardest part about this is that's exactly why we need to dedicate the funding to make sure we can make this kind of transformative progress year over year. Right now, we simply can't.
I appreciate that. It would be great if we had limitless funding. And I often think of it as though, you know, if we want to say, you know, redo your floors in your home, you wait until you're on vacation or you can move out of the house. But we can't move out of the city and then fix everything, move back in. So understood. I've really finished all the questions here. I'll let Ron wrap up. The last one was just, you know, we talk about tourism for good in Nashville. So in your mind, what is tourism for good?
Tourism for good to me is, I've had a couple of lessons on this over the past few years. I think tourism for good is where the fundamental principle is the best thing to be is a great place to live, because then it's wonderful when people visit. And when those people visit, they don't exploit or disrespect your hospitality. They are offered it and they receive it with respect. Andy Burke, a former mayor of Chattanooga, said to me when I saw him last summer in DC, where he's been working for the USDA, implementing some of the Inflation Reduction Act policies. We were talking about Nashville's growth, and he said, you know, we looked at this seriously at Chattanooga at a time when we were starting to show up on more maps. Chattanooga's been heralded as one of the best cities for outdoors enthusiasts in the Southeast. That was somewhat because they have a wealth of natural resources in the area, but somewhat a strategic thing. But Mayor Burke said an important thing. He said, one of the most important lessons we learned from the people talking to us about this was, don't create tourism opportunities that repel locals. And so as we have taken on the East Bank project, we have looked at a policy environment that should support activities for all ages, should support a world-class performing arts district, should support a mix of incomes, and should ultimately attract locals to live, work, and play. I think it's great to have these wonderful new announcements of direct flights to Iceland and Ireland. I think those are exciting things for the city. But I want people coming here because this is an amazing place for our world-class musicians to live as they perform music, and that the musicians love living here, and that those people are coming to create memories that will last a lifetime rather than go home barely able to remember anything because they were drunk on Broadway.
So thank you, Mayor. Last night, Rabbi Laurie talked about legacy and what it is that we will leave behind that will have an effect on not just the ones around us now, but the ones in the future. And this morning, Rabbi Flip talked about that space between the action and response. And it's so good to hear you talking about some of those kinds of decisions that are being made now. We appreciate your time, and if you have a little bit of time to stay around, I think there are people here who would be very happy to thank you in person for the time you've given us this afternoon.
Sure, happy to do that. Thank you all for having me today.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, smart. Smart. Ron was great. Great.